honestly, after talking about subjects like radiation poisoning and the KKK, I thought I should try reviewing something a bit more lighthearted. Oh yeah, forgot about the Nazis. Loosely based on the book The Story of the Von Trapp Family Singers by Maria Trapp, The Sound of Music has become one of the most popular musicals of all time, though its success seems to have overshadowed the actual history of the Von Trapp family, especially the 1965 musical, which remains one of the highest grossing films of all time. But how much was altered in the transition from book to screen? While it's true that the directors of The Sound of Music took more than a few liberties with the story's source material, especially considering that the nearly 3-hour-long film adapts only the first half of Maria's book, they still managed to preserve the basic outline of the story. Maria Trapp, an aspiring nun at Nürnberg Abbey in Austria, is recruited by the Reverend Mother to serve as governess to Captain Von Trapp, a retired naval officer, and his family. Though initially opposed to the idea of leaving the Abbey, Maria quickly falls in love with her young charges, though complications begin to arise when the captain's fiancé reveals that he may be coveting romantic feelings towards Maria. Shocked by this revelation, Maria returns to the Abbey, where, after receiving counsel from the Reverend Mother, she decides to forgo her life as a nun to marry the captain. Though Maria's new life is turned upside down, when following the Nazi occupation of Austria, she and her family are forced to flee the country. Oh, and the Von Trapp family also won first prize at a singing festival. Though being that the circumstances surrounding this event differ considerably from book to screen, I'm going to talk more about it in the next section. While Film Maria claims that she was enamored by the nuns of Nürnberg from a young age, often coming down to the Abbey to watch them as they worked, in reality, Maria was raised as an atheist and had very little contact with religion of any kind until she attended Teachers College in Vienna, joining the Abbey shortly after graduation. In her book, Maria explains that she was encouraged to take up the position as governess by the Reverend Mother, who believed that spending time outside the Abbey would help alleviate her migraines. It's also important to note that, unlike in the film, Maria only served as governess to 2 of the Von Trapp children, Maria and Agatha, who, for various reasons, were unable to attend school with their siblings. The children's names and ages were altered for the film, and while I know that this is a holdover from the stage musical, I'm still not sure exactly why this change was necessary. The Von Trapp's personalities were also very different from their film counterparts, as rather than a group of rowdy pranksters, Maria depicts the children as incredibly well behaved, while their father George comes across as a kind and doting parent, remarkably different from the controlling authoritarian depicted in the film. The real Captain Von Trapp actually encouraged his children's love of music, and seems to have had no issue with them playing outside, though they were still required to wear sailor suits indoors. According to Maria, it was actually the family housekeeper, Baroness Matilda, who often objected to her ideas, like play clothes for the children. But at least she never had to make clothing out of drapes. The filmmakers decide to change the name of the captain's fiancée from Princess Yvonne to Baroness Schroeder, though the 2 figures do share several elements in common, like their noble demeanor, feminine charm, extreme self-confidence, and love of boarding schools. Unlike her film counterpart, Maria initially harbored no romantic feelings towards Captain Von Trapp. agreeing to marry him only because the Reverend Mother told her that it was God's will. Kinda puts a damper on the romance, doesn't it? Though, in the end, Maria didn't regret her decision. And considering how much she loved the outdoors, she likely would have had a hard time living in a place where she was forced to kiss the floor in penance every time she looked outside. Maria and George von Trapp were married in Naumburg Abbey in 1927, 11 years before the Nazi occupation of Austria. During this time, the von Trapps lost their entire fortune, and the family's hobby of singing became a way for them to earn some much-needed revenue, though they were initially very reluctant to sing in public, entering their first singing competition only because of the encouragement of a close family friend. George, in particular, found the idea of his family performing on stage to be incredibly uncomfortable, though he did eventually get used to it. However, despite their popularity, winning several music competitions, and even going on tour across Europe, the family's open disdain for the Third Reich made it impossible for them to stay in Austria. Though, rather than climbing over the Alps to Switzerland, like in the film, they just boarded a train to Italy. While the reality of their escape is far less dramatic than the film's interpretation, which also has them escaping from Nazis at a music festival and being sheltered by nuns, as many people have pointed out, crossing over the Alps from Salzburg would not have landed them in Switzerland, but in Germany, which, given the circumstances, would have been kinda self-defeating. Though the von Trapp family did flee Austria after George refused an offer to serve in the German Navy, he wasn't the only member of the family to turn down the Third Reich, as his eldest son Rupert refused an offer to work at a large hospital in Vienna, while the rest of the family rejected an invitation to sing at Hitler's birthday party. While it's true that Hans, the family butler, was a member of the Nazi Party, Maria's book depicts him in a much kinder light than the film, describing how he chose to stay with the family even after they could no longer afford to pay his full salary, though their feelings towards him started to sour after the occupation, with Maria stating that he could no longer be trusted. Rather than the money-grubbing Max Detweiler, Reverend Franz Wassner, a friend and boarder at the von Trapp's home, served as the group's musical director for over 20 years, even escaping with them to America in 1938. By the time they left Austria, the von Trapp family had expanded to include 2 new members, Rosemary, born in 1929, and Eleanor, born in 1931, with the 10th and final child, Johannes, arriving shortly after they relocated to America in 1939. Hey, a silver from the editing room here. While I was editing the video, I realized that there are a few things I forgot to talk about. First off, Liesel's boyfriend, Rolf, is a film addition, which shouldn't come as much of a surprise, considering that Liesel herself is kind of a fictitious character. Second, while it's true that Captain von Trapp used a whistle to call his children, according to Maria, he only did this because it was less time-consuming than calling them all one at a time, which, considering both the size of his family and the house they lived in, actually seems fairly reasonable. While the film ends with the von Trapps marching triumphantly across the Alps to Germany, the book details the family's new life in America and all the changes they faced while adjusting to their new environment. Though The Sound of Music has never been my favorite musical, that honor instead going to Bedknobs and Broomsticks, I found the latter part of the book, specifically the fish out of water aspect, to be really interesting, and I definitely recommend it to fans of the musical, especially if you're interested in finding out what happened to the Von Trapps after the war ended. As always, I'm Silver Jade, asking you to please remember to support your local library, and I'll see you all next time.